This is Atomic Shinobi, and today I'm going to narrate 11th and final part of What If Naruto Was Trained by an Assassin. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Now, wasting no more time, let's start the story.
Seated in the Hokage's office, Sarutobi smoked his pipe and waited for the shinobi he had called to come. Sarutobi was currently questioning whether fate itself was telling him that he should retire as soon as possible because of a letter that the head of Takigakure no Sato had left out on his desk. It appeared that everything that happened during his second term in office had the potential to spark another shinobi war if handled carelessly. His thoughts were interrupted when Jiraiya appeared, not through the window, as he usually did, but rather with a straightforward shunshin. "Jiraiya, thank you for coming. Sadly, the others haven't arrived yet," Sarutobi said, motioning for him to take a seat. "I guess I'll have to wait to find out what's happening," Jiraiya remarked, sitting down and slowly massaging his weary eyes. It was difficult for him to sleep at night because of the shame and self-loathing he felt from having to face his shortcomings with Naruto. Surprisingly, this guilt even killed his desire to engage in his usual perverted antics. Rather than trying to distract himself, he had thrown himself into training and drinking. Sarutobi did nothing more than nod to his student and wait in silence for the others he had called to come. Fortunately, it didn't take them very long. Yugito Ni and Asuma Sarutobi, Team 10's Junin sensei, emerged as the office door opened. Just as Yugito was about to close the door, two figures bowed their heads toward Sarutobi and abruptly emerged from the room, both crouching on one knee. Both figures had Anbu tattoos on their left shoulders, and they were dressed in the traditional Anbu garb. Their cloaks were missing. One, a man, wore a crow mask and had short, spiky brown hair. The woman with the long purple hair was the other. She was wearing a cat mask and had a katana sheathed over her shoulder. "Karasu, Neko," Sarutobi said, acknowledging the two Anbu members before turning to face the others. "Asuma-san, Yugito-san. Thank you for coming quickly. I have a mission of the utmost importance." He gestured to the letter he was holding. "Information has reached me that the village of Takigakure no Sato is going to turn their Jinchuriki over to an S-ranked criminal organization known as Akatsuki, after being threatened by two members of said organization." At this, Yugito tensed up, and Jiraiya silently cursed. Asuma appeared a little perplexed, but neither of the Anbu responded. With a cigarette out and ready to light, he asked, "Why does this Akatsuki want their Jinchuriki?" Sarutobi said, "Jiraiya, if you will," which made Jiraiya get to his feet. Jiraiya began briefing them on what they were probably dealing with, saying, "Akatsuki is an organization filled with S-ranked missing nin, including the likes of Kisame Hoshigaki and Itachi Uchiha and formerly including Orochimaru. Their goals are not entirely known at this point, but they have shown an interest in acquiring the Jinchuriki of the Biju. Quite recently they attempted to kidnap Naruto Uzumaki, though they failed. It is likely they will continue to do so, as well as attempt to capture you as well," Jiraiya said to Yugito, who gave a grim. Jiraiya pivoted swiftly to face Sarutobi again. "Do we know which two were sent to retrieve Taki's Jinchuriki?" Sarutobi answered, "Kakuzu, formerly of Takigakure no Sato. It was he who made the demand of Taki to surrender Fu, their Jinchuriki. They did not identify his partner, however." With a quick motion, Jiraiya took out a notebook and began to flip through it, muttering, "Kakuzu, here we go. His partner is a former Yugakure shinobi named Hidan. According to my information, these two are nicknamed the Zombie Brothers, due to Kakuzu wielding a kinjutsu that makes him practically immortal. Hidan apparently has a kinjutsu as well, though my informants have had a hard time finding out more about it. We do have plenty of info on Kakuzu's capabilities though, thanks to Taki." At that, Sarutobi gave a nod. "Thank you. Now as to the reason why I brought you all here. Taki's head shinobi has unofficially requested that we rescue Taki's Jinchuriki. He will give her instructions to make for the Hai no Kuni border with all speed and to attempt to rendezvous with Konoha shinobi in order to request asylum. Asuma-san, you will lead the squad on what seems like a routine patrol of the border near Taki, where you will be waiting for food to arrive. Jiraiya will be present but will only intervene should Akatsuki cross the border or if they manage to intercept Fu on the Taki side of it. Under no circumstances are the rest of you to cross the border. We need to make this look like it is a coincidence and nothing more." Asuma quickly extracted the cigarette from his mouth and placed it in his father's desk ashtray. "Understood, Hokage. Sama. Jiraiya. Sama, I hope you can brief us on what to expect in case we do end up having to fight these two," he replied. "Of course. Suffice to say though, I should be the one primarily engaging them if things come to that. It'd be better for the rest of you to provide support." Especially you, Jiraiya replied, focusing on Yugito. Placing another Jinchuriki within their sights might be too tempting of a target for them. In response, Yugito cracked her knuckles. Then I'll make sure they regret their hasty action. You all leave within 2 hours. Make best speed to the border and wait there. Remember though, remain on our side of the border. Taking another Jinchuriki into our walls will likely cause uproar with the other villages, and Taki will most likely demand she be returned to them. We must do our best to give as little ammunition to anyone who would speak out against this, Sarutobi reminded the 5 shinobi. Dismissed. As the others departed, Jiraiya stuck behind, frowning slightly as he turned to face Sarutobi. I don't like this, they're moving quickly to secure the Jinchuriki. I thought we'd have more time, he said with concern. Maybe recent happenings have alarmed them, Sarutobi thought to himself, taking out documents. Recent reports indicate that the rebellion in Kirigakure has swung in the favor of the bloodline rebels. They have secured over half the country and are pushing on the village itself. If the Mizukage is killed before Akatsuki can secure his Biju, it'll set them back for a considerable amount of time. Jiraiya pondered, murmuring, perhaps, but why haven't they gone after him yet then? It would be so simple of them to use the confusion of the war to slip into Kiri and retrieve him, especially if they wait for the rebels to attack. Instead, they went after Naruto and now Taki's Jinchuriki. And my spies in Tsuchi no Kuni have reported them starting to snoop around there as well. We will understand in time, Jiraiya. For now, focus on the task at hand. Make sure the others are briefed on what we know about Kakuzu and this Hidan, and be ready to intervene at a moment's notice. I will need to get to work setting things up for Fu's arrival and preventing the likes of Danzo from getting her, Sarutobi said, immediately going to a different drawer on his desk. Jiraiya shrugged and said, Understood Sarutobi. Sensei. I'll leave you to it, leaving the elderly leader to sigh as he started preparing the new paperwork. In another part of the village, someone was observing their quarry train in the middle of an open field while silently leaning against a tree with their arms folded. For a few moments, the figure stayed in that position before coming into the open and making his approach. Hinata.san. Hinata completed the combo she was practicing with her short sword in its Naginata form, then flourished the weapon to change it back into a short sword. Hinata had been practicing with her short sword. She asked, a little icily, as she sheathed her weapon and faced Neji. Neji.san. Do you require something of me? His gaze briefly lifted to reveal the seal adorning her forehead. His voice revealed nothing of his thoughts as he spoke softly, so it is true. You no longer hide it. I feel less inclined to do so, Hinata said with a stiff backward tilt of her head. The Hyuga view it as a mark of shame and humiliation, the ultimate sign of disgrace. But I no longer see it that way. This seal is a mark of my freedom from their oppression, their control, their desire to shape and mold me into what they want and not what I can become. So now, I display it as such. Neji responded with a quiet nod of his own. You turned down a chance to return to the clan. I assume due to the same reason you now openly show that seal? Hinata narrowed her eyes and looked away. Pulling out her weapon once more, she activated her Byakugan to watch him and prepare for training. Is there a point to this conversation? Neji.san? I wish to return to my training, she said. Neji remained motionless for a few seconds before he spoke. I have thought about what you said after our match. At first, I intended to dismiss it, but then, something came into my possession that made me realize the truth. You were right, Hinata.san, about fate. I was using it as nothing but a crutch. A cowardly way to not have to accept responsibility for my actions and failures, and to decry the accomplishments of others. That is why I am here today. I wish to both thank you and apologize to you, he stated. If Hinata hadn't seen him reach up and take off the bandages beneath his forehead protector and reveal his own seal, she would have probably ignored him. He then bent over and bowed, touching his forehead to the floor as she turned, her eyes wide with shock and amazement. I do not ask for forgiveness, as I have not earned it. I wronged you greatly while you were part of the Hyuga clan, unfairly blaming you for my OTOU. San's death, blaming you for what was done to me. You were only ever kind to me, and I treated you horribly in return. All I can offer you are my sincerest apologies for failing to be a good family member to you, and thank you for helping open my eyes. Thank you, Hinata. Sama, he said quietly, bowing his head. The girl with indigo hair was stunned into silence when she saw her cousin, the prodigy who had treated her with a deep-seated contempt and apathy, and whom she had longed to support and console, kneeling before her and expressing his gratitude and apology. She was stunned for a few moments before she could say anything. Finally, she said, cursing the brief return of her stutter due to her shock and incredulity. Please stand, she said. Neji did so slowly, studying him with his gray, white eyes meeting her lavender ones. She finally said something. "I will give you an opportunity to gain my pardon," Hinata eventually uttered. "Hanabi needs help growing stronger, and I cannot offer her as much aid on that front as I would like. You, however, can offer to help her grow strong in the Jukin. Guide her in becoming as strong and capable as you are in the Hyuga arts. And protect her as best you can from enemies without and within the clan." After widening his eyes, Neji nodded. He bowed his head and said, "As you wish, Hinata-san. I will give my aid to Hanabi. Sama. Please understand what I am asking you, Neji-san. I am entrusting my Imouto to you. Do for her what I cannot," Hinata replied quietly. "I believe Hanabi will one day be able to fulfill the dream I once had, to bring the Hyuga clan together as a true clan instead of a group of masters and servants. And I will give her all the strength and aid I can to help her become the strongest and greatest clan head the Hyuga have known. I know my Ka-san will do the same. But she will need someone who can help her in the ways we cannot. Please show me that you are that person." Neji understood and nodded. "I will, Hinata-san," he declared. Hinata merely nodded slightly and turned away. "Was that all?" she questioned. Neji said, "It was. Thank you for listening to me, Hinata-san," before grabbing his bandages and forehead protector and heading out. After a few silent moments, Hinata let out a trembling breath and her shoulders sagged. It was not at all what she had anticipated happening. It had seemed to her that their brief conversation in the arena infirmary would be their only meaningful exchange together. She never imagined that he would choose to approach her and even apologize, so she was surprised by his decision. She inhaled deeply, trying to ignore the surprise as she got ready to resume her training. She wouldn't think about forgiving him until after she saw if he lived up to his word. If he did assist Hanabi, at the very least, she would see that as sufficient evidence. In an effort to refocus, she resumed her training and launched several sword strikes against the training post. Konoha apartment building. Biting her lip, Anko Midarashi examined the letter she had just finished writing and wondered if she really wanted to give it. The letter had something to do with something she had been thinking about for a while, something that was inside her that she wanted to share but had kept hidden from most people. Something very personal to her that she found difficult to disclose because it ran so strongly counter to her typically gregarious, combative, and flirtatious demeanor. She hesitated because she was a little afraid of what Raphael, the person who would be receiving this letter, would think of her after he found out. The irrational part of her, born from being abandoned and betrayed by Orochimaru, was worried that he liked her for how she had acted and that revealing this other part of her might cause that attraction to fade. The rational part of her knew it was stupid because this wasn't anything that changed who she was or would likely change how he viewed her. Shaking her head and cursing that part of herself, she finished the letter quickly, tying it to a scroll and getting to her feet. She quickly grabbed her favorite tan coat and put it on with a pair of boots before heading outside, checking her miniskirt and t-shirt for any signs of ink or mess. Since Raphael and her shared a building, her first destination wasn't far, just a few floors and doors away. She hesitated a moment before stopping outside his door and knocking. He answered in a matter of seconds. His eyes flitted to take in her appearance, then he asked, "Anko-chan," and grinned. "What can I do for you?" She gave herself a small flush, then held out the letter and scroll. She looked away slightly in embarrassment as she spoke quickly. "I know this is really weird, but please read this letter, then the scroll, and then, on Wednesday, go to the address in the letter." Raphael took them both, blinking slightly in confusion. "So, is there a problem?" he asked, cocking his head slightly to the side as he pondered his girlfriend's situation. For her, this was a bit strange. She swiftly shook her head. No, it's okay. Just, you'll see, I promise," she said, then awkwardly smiled at him. "See you then," she exclaimed, then hurriedly walked away. After closing the door, Raphael merely blinked once more before picking up the letter and moving to the dining table to start reading them both. He wondered what had become of his usually self-assured girlfriend. Sato no Otogakure, the former snake sage of Konoha, Orochimaru, was standing in what had been Kabuto's medical lab, scowling at the experiments and documents left behind, in his secret lair. Gurren followed him, who had stayed his right-hand ninja even after her recent failures in trying to recruit Tsunade. Her head bowed slightly in a sign of submission. She waited for his orders. Orochimaru carefully strolled around the lab, inspecting everything. "I must admit, Gurren-chan, I am somewhat put out," he said. Kabuto-kun was quite good at his work. In fact, he may have even come close to matching me one day in terms of research. But now we will never know. And unfortunately, we seem to have no one to replace him. Tsunade. Chan spat upon my offer and took her apprentice with her. And that Uzumaki I was looking into was scooped up by Konoha so very quickly. It's too bad, her abilities would have proven very useful, he said before focusing on a specific piece of study. He conducted research on Tayuya Uzumaki, the orphan girl he had discovered in the alleyway, using the curse seal that he had put on her. Her Uzumaki DNA and the powerful, almost seemingly self-contained chakra chains she had wielded were the reasons he had first recruited her. But when he had sealed her with the curse seal, it had taken a dim view of the strong chakra the Uzumaki were reputed to possess and sealed most of it away, including the chains themselves. She also suffered from amnesia as a result of the trauma of the incident. Orochimaru had intended to leave her to be dissected in a lab after learning of this, but Kabuto had requested permission to study her in an effort to maybe reverse what had been done and aid in the development of the curse seal. In the end, it had proven to be a worthwhile endeavor because, after receiving the appropriate training, Tayuya had shown herself to be a very competent genjutsu user, even in the absence of her Uzumaki reserves and chakra chains. As one of his 4 bodyguards, she stood now. Nevertheless, Orochimaru hoped that she might still be able to reveal the Uzumaki family's secrets. He gathered Kabuto's research on the topic and extended it to Gurren. Take this to whoever is head researcher now. Tell them it is their only priority to finish understanding what happened and how to undo it, he instructed. Bending her head, she said, "As you command, Orochimaru." Sama, and got ready to proceed. He started talking again, stopping her. Afterwards, gather the sound 4 and send them to me. I have a long-term mission for them, he stated. She just gave him another bow and walked away, leaving Orochimaru to go through his deceased right-hand man's research and determine what was valuable, what was useless, and what his minion might be concealing from him. He paused briefly upon discovering a form on a medical table, stretched out beneath a blanket. He recognized the figure as Kagaya Kimimaro, the former leader of the Sound 5, and one of the potential bodies he had planned to assume as part of his immortality jutsu. He let out a mental sigh of disappointment. Being the last of his clan, he possessed a strong bloodline ability that would have come in handy in battle. The young man had unfortunately succumbed to an illness, but it was clear that Kabuto had been providing for him in some way. However, based on the numerous tubes, needles, and sealing arrays attached to Kimimaro's form, it was evident that maintaining the Kaguya's life required a significant amount of work. Orochimaru turned away, never letting the figure know he was there, going about his business seeking out any information that would help him in his next undertakings. Uchiha Complex, Konoha right now. Sasuke was sitting in his room, staring at the wall across from him without saying anything. After being discharged from the hospital, he was left in the care of his mother, but he had to recover and rest for a minimum of 3 days before he could resume his training. Something that the longer he did nothing about, the more he hated it. His desire was to be in training. He desired to be working out physically and concentrating on bettering himself. And not only because of everything that had happened to him, but also because he was now more determined than ever to confront Itachi and defeat him for his treachery. Shivering, Sasuke balled his fist in memory of what had happened to him inside Itachi's genjutsu. Not successful. Unavoidable, ongoing failure. He had repeatedly and completely failed to save his father. He had been made to watch his death repeatedly, and each time he had been helpless to stop it. It hadn't been the same every time. Not every time was Itachi the one to stop him. Occasionally, a different person would show up to stop him. One of them, the man Naruto had battled, was the one he had identified as having been with Itachi. Though they all wore black cloaks with red clouds, just like Itachi and his companion, the others were unknown to him. But when they had appeared, each of them had completely overpowered him, taking him down in 1 or 2 moves and rendering him defenseless while Itachi killed their father. It was just beyond Sasuke's comprehension. How cruel his brother had become was beyond him. He had always received mentorship and guidance from his brother, who had always been incredibly helpful and kind. How did he get to be this monster? With a slow, downward gaze, Sasuke released his fist. It was something he had to concede. He was weak in spite of all his preparation and effort. Too frail to even consider achieving his objective. When he was unable to defend himself, how could he defend his clan? A rage welled up inside of him as he realized how pitiful his performance against Itachi had been. And he had no idea that his thoughts were setting off something. Sasuke's dark thoughts started to consume his mind, and the curse mark on his shoulder very faintly glowed. And it wasn't just Itachi. Even though he had trained for a whole month to defeat Gaara, Naruto ultimately had to save him. He had accepted the fact that the boy was powerful and most likely the only student in their year group who could match him. But in the fight, Naruto not only equaled but outperformed Gaara. When Gaara had failed, Naruto had triumphed. He had to be saved by Naruto. How could his strength have decreased? Why was he not getting any stronger? Rising from his bed, Sasuke paced around furiously, clenching and unclenching his fists. He received instruction from one of Konoha's most formidable and well-liked Junin. He had his clan's support and training. How could he be less strong than that little orphan learning from some Junin he had never heard of before? Clamping his teeth and clenching his fists, Sasuke stopped pacing in the middle of the room. He was not going to get any more assistance from his clan than he had already received. He had already received some assistance from those who were occupied with their shinobi responsibilities during their free time. And when it came to helping him train, his mother occasionally gave off the impression that she wasn't interested in pushing him to advance beyond the speed she established or help him become proficient in methods he knew he was ready for. It seemed like even Kaseki was holding back, not allowing himself to get stronger faster. His team did not assist either. Although Kiba was skilled in combat, Sasuke never thought the Inuzuku boy could truly test his mettle. If Sakura was being truthful with himself, he was a handicap. And how could Kakashi really learn from the man's lessons if he couldn't concentrate only on him? For a moment, he had a sinister thought. They were preventing him from moving forward. His mother, the clan, his teammates, and his sensei. Perhaps even the village itself. They were preventing him from getting the strength he needed to defeat Itachi, defend his clan, exact revenge on the dead, and reclaim the honor that his treacherous brother had stolen. Sasuke froze almost immediately after those thoughts entered his mind, his eyes widening with shock and a hint of horror. Was that really his thought? That he was being held back by his own mother and clan? He shook his head instantly, attempting to dismiss that idea. His mom was exercising caution. She was afraid of losing her one and only son. Her oldest son had caused her to lose her husband. She would naturally be concerned that he would become too strong too quickly and might get in over his head. Sasuke uncurled his clenched fists and inhaled deeply, attempting to drive the dark thoughts from his consciousness. Still, that thought persisted despite all of his efforts, even as the curse mark's faint glow diminished. After deciding it would be best to go talk to his mother and spend time with her, Sasuke left his room. That would prevent his thoughts from wandering to such gloomy places and help him regain his focus. Tsunade was at the Konoha hospital, sitting in the back of a large room that served as both a lecture hall for aspiring medic.nin and a place where the head staff would notify the doctors and nurses of important information. She had discreetly entered it as Shizune was delivering a guest lecture to a number of trainees, recounting her experiences when she had to apply the abilities and knowledge that Tsunade had taught her on the road. As the doctor in charge of these classes thanked Shizune for speaking today and dismissed the students, the lecture was coming to an end. Tsunade's gaze strayed to two girls who, considering their age and the Konoha headbands adorning them, had to be genin. As they walked away, the person with the red hair that was half straight and half spiky said something that caused the person with the pink hair to giggle a little. Tsunade then turned to face Shizune as she got closer. Tsunade. Sama, you surprised me, I wasn't expecting you, the slightly anxious younger woman remarked. What brings you here? Tsunade got up and grinned. Tsunade teased Shizune, making her pout a little. Well, I heard my apprentice was guest speaking and wanted to make sure she didn't make me sound too bad, Shizune said. The older woman started to leave the lecture hall and nodded to the side, signaling for Shizune to follow. As they walked away, Shizune quickly fell behind, but Tsunade motioned for her to follow. As they left the hospital, there was a brief period of silence before Tsunade spoke. She muttered, Sarutobi. Sensei talked to me about being Hokage. Before the blonde spoke once more, Shizune looked up and saw a thoughtful expression on Tsunade's face. His words, they were quite convincing. I was actually pondering accepting his offer for some time there. Shizune asked, Are you saying you no longer are pondering? Tsunade paused for a moment before sighing and continuing on her way. Finally, Tsunade said, I wanted to ask your thoughts on it. Sarutobi. Sensei already gave me his opinion. And Jiraiya, well, if he was in the village he wouldn't be in any shape to give me advice, not after what happened with Naruto. You're the only one I can turn to and expect honest advice from. Tsunade put her hands on the railing and looked up at the sky as the two came to a stop on a bridge. Quietly, she asked Shizune, Do you honestly think I could be Hokage? And that I even have a right to? I'm not a leader. I never wanted to be one. Hell, I ran away from the village here. There's a part of me that still does want to leave and not look back. And yet now, so many people are telling me I'm the only one who can take the position of Hokage. Or at least, that I'm the best choice in order to preserve my grandfather's legacy. As Tsunade stood there leaning slightly on the bridge railing, Shizune, keeping a step behind her, asked her mentor, Perhaps they all see something in you that you don't see yourself. Tsunade closed her eyes and pondered Shizun's words for a while, not answering. When she did say something, it was in a tentative, quiet voice, full of uncertainty. Do you think they'd be proud of me? For fulfilling their dream for them? Shizun turned and leaned over so Tsunade could catch a glimpse of her face from the corner of her eye, grinning as she moved closer to her mentor. I believe they'd be thrilled to know their dream is what's pushing you forward. That you're not just honoring their memory, but fulfilling their hopes and dreams for them. Tsunade's eyes stayed closed, though the tiniest traces of tears appeared there. She wiped her eyes and opened them, looking to Shizun with a small smile. I hope that wherever they are, they'll give me their strength, she said. And I hope you'll be ready to work hard. There's no way I'll survive being Hokage without you beside me. All Shizun did was smile and bow. Obviously, Hokage. Sama, she uttered. Tsunade waved her away in a hurry. Tsunade pouted and turned away, saying, Bah, don't call me that now, it's bad luck. In fact, don't call me that at all. Call me Tsunade. Sama if you have to. Shizun said, as you wish, Tsunade. Sama, and trailed Tsunade off the bridge. As she did, the sight of her mentor brought a smile to her lips. It felt like a weight had been taken off her shoulders when she saw Tsunade standing proudly for the first time in a long time. Her head was held high, but not with conceit or haughtiness, but rather with assurance. And for a split second, Shizun insisted she saw two spectral figures. Both grinning. Moving alongside Tsunade before they vanished, she nodded and went with Tsunade. Her smile vanished upon hearing Tsunade's subsequent remarks. Tsunade exclaimed, Come on, let's go get a drink to celebrate my decision, and hurried over to the closest bar. Shizun exclaimed, Tea. Tsunade. Sama, you can't, we have so much to go take care of, as she started to pursue the blonde Sanin. The day after, Taki no Kuni, 1. A shadow slowly started to emerge from a hollow in a small clearing in the forest, which was mostly concealed by a tree's roots. The shadow was hardly emerging from their hiding place, as if looking for any indications of trespassers. But aside from the sounds of the animals, the clearing was quiet. Gradually, the silhouette emerged, exposing a somewhat androgynous appearing girl, possibly around 13 or 14 years of age. The girl had short, layered mint green hair, orange eyes, and tan skin. She was also quite small. She wore a white tank top that exposed her midriff, long white armlets, an armored mesh top underneath, and armored mesh shorts underneath a white skirt that resembled an apron. In addition, she wore black tacky forehead protector wrapped around her right arm, orange hair clip in her hair, and white standard-issue shinobi sandals. When she saw that no one was there, she spun around quickly and took a big red cylinder out of the hiding place she had been in. It was secured to her back by straps that crossed over her chest. After confirming its security, she swiftly turned south and sprinted to reach the Konoha border as fast as she could. The Nanabi Biju's Jinchuriki, Fu, was frantically escaping for her life. She was aware that two shinobi, far stronger than she was, were pursuing her somewhere. She had to get away. She had to carry out the last wishes of Shibuki, Sama. She had been informed that she and a few other shinobi would be joining her on a patrol mission. Considering that she was a genin and had spent a good deal of time exploring the woods surrounding the village, this task wasn't all that unusual for her. Shibuki had given her the mission scroll and instructed her to carefully read it. She had opened the scroll to review her orders when she got home to get ready for the patrol. There, she found the seal that Shibuki had concealed for her, a seal he had previously shown her while serving as her mentor in case he had any instructions or secret messages for her. After turning it on, she read the note he had left. Her heart hurt reading what she did. He informed her that the advisors of the village were planning to sell her to two extremely strong shinobi who had threatened to destroy the village if Taki did not give Fu over to them. Shibuki had opposed it and attempted to challenge the ruling, but in the end, he had been intimidated into officially agreeing. And officially, he'd made up his mind to try and save her. In his message, he informed her of the plans he had put in place to try and keep her safe. In order to get to the border with Hai no Kuni as soon as possible, she would need to get away from her shinobi escorts, who were going to give her over to the two Akatsuki members. Her mission was to cross the border, locate the closest Konoha shinobi, and file an asylum request. She ought to be somewhat protected there from these two Akatsuki members at the very least. The news that her village was betraying her had devastated Fu. She had believed that, at last, after all of her effort and commitment, she was beginning to at least connect with some of the shinobi. She was aware that Chome, the seven-tailed beetle Biju, was the reason why the majority of Taki's residents disliked her. Her being a boisterous young lady who played several practical jokes on others didn't help either. But with Shibuki's help, she had thrown herself into learning how to be a kunoichi of Takigakure no Sato. And it occurred to her that maybe, just maybe, some of the other shinobi were beginning to warm up to her too. But in the end, it made no difference. Ultimately, they had betrayed her. And now here she was, frantically running to the border. She had gone out with the patrol members the day before, but after a few hours she had taken them by surprise by using her Hiden Rinpungakure no Jutsu, Hiden, hiding in scale powder technique, to blind them before making her getaway. She had put as much distance between herself and them as possible in a straight run, managing to make good progress before slowing down and trying to hide her tracks. She tried for several hours to set up several false trails, some obvious, some not so much. It was a trick she'd learned from her days as a practical joker. After that, she carried on, first traveling east to further confuse her assailants before circling back to the south and the border with Hai no Kuni. She was compelled to find a hiding place as night fell. It was a moonless night, and it would be far too simple for a skilled shinobi to ambush her in the shadowed forest. Rather, she camped out for the night and bided her time until dawn. And here she was now, racing towards the border at breakneck speed, her legs receiving extra chakra as she jumped from branch to branch. She was aware that her actions were not totally covert, but maybe her deceptive clues had driven her attackers far enough away that they would never detect her presence or manage to catch up with her in time. She could still feel the chill clinging to her skin even though the early morning sun was beginning to warm things up. The freezing fear and sorrow. Sadness at having to leave her house and her friend, the only person she knew there, behind. And dread of these unidentified adversaries who sought her for some dark, unknowable reason. She continued to leap forward when she became aware of a presence that was far away to her right and behind, but that was getting closer all the time. That caused her eyes to widen. Chome, is that? Something buzzed inside her head. I don't know, but you better pour on the speed. Call upon my chakra if you have to, but get across that border, Biju said to the beetle. Fu did nothing more than nod and try to pick up more speed while holding off on using the Nanabi's chakra. But her increased speed didn't seem to be of any use. The presence was drawing nearer. Whoever it was wasn't even trying to cover up. It seemed like she was attempting to escape, or they were using their chakra quickly to catch up to her. Or maybe they didn't give a damn if they were discovered. It was almost like they wanted her to. She was leaping from branch to branch when the attack came from her left, and she was barely able to flip over the black tendril that had tried to smack her out of the air. She channeled her Biju's power instead of landing on a tree, and as a result, several tendrils of chakra appeared at the small of her back and eventually formed into 6 wings that began to flutter frantically, keeping her aloft. As she turned to face the way she had come, she saw a figure step out onto a tree branch while she was hovering in midair. As she took them in, she felt herself freeze. The individual in question was 6 feet tall. He was nearly completely hidden by a long, black coat with red trim and cloud designs on it. All that was visible were his feet and head, though even his head and face were mostly hidden by a black mask and gray hood that covered his lower face and only showed his eyes. His eyes were peculiar, with red sclera and green irises devoid of pupils, and dark, weathered skin that was tanned. He had a tacky forehead protector around his head, but there was a scratch in the symbol, indicating that his nin status was missing. The black tendril that had attempted to slam into her appeared from one of the man's sleeves, but it was now retracting up into the sleeve's depths. Fu was about to speak when a second man materialized next to the first. The second man was a few inches shorter than the first, and although he wore the same coat, it was partially open, exposing part of his bare chest in addition to an odd amulet and a slashed forehead protector for Yugakure no Sato around his neck. He had less tan, paler skin, slicked back gray hair, purple eyes, and a smug smile on his face. The handle of a weapon Fu could not identify from her current position protruded over his left shoulder. So this is the little bitch we were sent to get? She sure led us on a nice fucking chase, didn't she? The second man asked, reaching up with his left hand to grip the weapon's handle, but the first man stopped him in his tracks by raising a hand in front of him. He then turned back to face the first man. This one is mine, Hidan. You know that you're responsible for managing the Nibi, the first man said with a low growl as he moved cautiously forward. Even as Kakuzu stepped forward, examining the girl, the named Hidan yelled angrily, "Fuck you, Kakuzu. Those dipshit tacky shinobi weren't a good enough sacrifice for Jashin, Sama." Fu glanced at the two men and felt her own body quiver. Their eyes showed neither fear nor concern. The fact that she was channeling Chome's power caused some of Taki's Junin to perspire a little. These two, though, appeared completely unconcerned. Before she spoke slowly, Her gaze shifted to the slashed tacky emblem on Kakuzu's forehead protector. She tried to quiet herself and asked, What do you want with me? Kakuzu gestured toward her. Your Biju. Surrender, Jinchuriki. You're not going to be able to get away, and I have no interest in prolonging this any more than need be. So make this easy so we can be done and move on to something more profitable, he said in a voice that seemed worn out and lazy. Hidan exclaimed, pulling a long, handled, bladed scythe from his back sheath. Fuck your greed, Kakuzu. If you're going to be this much of a lazy shit, just let me fight her then. He was about to advance when he lifted his scythe to stop Kakuzu's backhand. I told you, this one belongs to me, Kakuzu angrily remarked. Just because I have no interest in wasting time fighting her doesn't mean I'm going to let you take her instead. It's my way of getting back at that pathetic little village. Observing their distraction, Fu promptly took the only action that occurred to her. She quickly released more shimmering powder from her mouth in a massive cloud that separated her from the two shinobi with a quick use of the tiger hand sign. The cloud of sparkling dust was struck by the sunlight that broke through the treetops and quickly created a blinding light. However, Hidan and Kakuzu quickly closed their eyes upon witnessing her actions, having already questioned the Taki shinobi who were meant to accompany Fu to them and ascertained the precise nature of what had transpired. With his eyes closed, Hidan smirked and sprang forward, swinging his scythe, only to yell when he came into contact with something sticky. What the hell is this? My eyes? Fucking damn it, I'll gut that fucking bitch, so help me Jashin. Sama. When Kakuzu eventually opened his eyes to see what had happened, he was waiting for the powder to diffuse and the bright light to go out. Fu was gone, as was expected. Kakuzu did see Hidan, scratching his eyes angrily, half wrapped up in thick strands of some kind of insect webbing. With a sigh, Kakuzu descended and used his kunai to slice through the webbing with ease. You opened your eyes, didn't you? You inquired, fixing Hidan with a sardonic gaze. The ninja with the scythe glared at Kakuzu with eyes full of tear ducts. Fuck you already. Just go get the bitch before I gut you in the name of Jashin. Sama, he growled. Fu was flying as fast as she could up ahead, her only goal being to stay up above the trees. Thinking she'd be safe up here, shielded from melee range by her ability to sense or see any approaching ranged attacks. She flew through the air, her 6 chakra wing constructs buzzing frantically as she flew, looking back every now and then to see if anyone was pursuing her. She was soon forced to sidestep as the wind bullet that was pursuing her shot through the tops of the trees. Water and fire projectiles soon followed, with Fu barely managing to dodge as a fireball burst not too far in front of her, making her yell. She could not stop bending and swerving as the projectiles hit her so quickly and frequently that she started to question if she was being pursued by more than just her 2 assailants. Biting her lip, she looked forward, praying she would reach the border before too long. Since there was no true natural boundary between the two nations, it would be challenging to determine, but Konoha had established a number of outposts that its shinobi used as bases for their patrols. She would know she was safe if, while in the air, she managed to locate one of them. A wind bullet passed uncomfortably close underneath her, and she rose higher, but then there was a new danger. This time, a lightning bolt struck the ground quicker than any of the previous shots. When it hit Fu, her body seized up and the chakra wings vanished, causing her to scream. As she saw the trees getting closer, her body started to rebel and she started to fall quickly to the ground. And that's when she was yanked in a different direction and a long, pink tongue appeared out of the trees ahead of her. The pink, slimy muscle gripped her tightly and quickly retracted to a massive, horse-sized toad, leaving her helpless. It turned and started hopping in the same direction as Fu, making huge bounds right away. Segmenting the toad's mouth a little, Fu noticed a figure trailing behind, one with a long, spiky mane of grayish-white hair. Hang in there, kid, we're almost to the border, the figure said, following the toad. Just then, a shadowy mass that appeared to be a writhing jumble of tendrils encircling a blue painted mask shot towards them, tearing through the trees. There was a roar, and the man turned, an orb of chakra appearing in his hand before he drove it at the dark mass. The creature decelerated and attempted to sidestep, yet the chakra orb still managed to clip it, sending it hurtling through multiple trees before coming to a halt. Jiraiya made a quick clone of himself in shadow, grunting. Keep em busy, he commanded, turning to pursue the toad alongside Fu. The shadow clone vanished into the foliage, observing and biding its time. Fu winced as sensation returned to her limbs, though for the most part it was only a tingling sensation throughout her skin. Still, she was beginning to feel the slime from her tongue on her. She watched from behind the toad as they continued their frantic run, trying not to notice the irony of the situation or how uncomfortable it felt. Abruptly, they came to a halt in a clearing, where the toad helped her descend to the ground. A moment later, a man in a mask was kneeling beside her, examining her closely. Fu heard two other people nearby, and another masked figure. A woman, stand over them with her sword drawn. A male voice with a deep baritone voice asked, Karasu, what's her status? She is temporarily paralyzed, most likely from a mild Raiden jutsu. She should recover soon, but I doubt she'll be in fighting shape, the man in the mask said, not raising his head to address her. Footfalls sounded, and a different male voice, the one from the guy who had saved her, spoke up. Then you and Neko get her out of her. Head as deep into Hai no Kuni as you can. We'll catch up with you later. Asuma, Yugito, with me. We'll hold them here in case they try to cross, said the man. Fu tried to turn around and see the person who had come to her rescue. Beside him stood a stocky man with spiky black hair dressed in the traditional Konoha uniform, and across from him was a younger woman in some kind of robe that had a hood up. She made an attempt to speak, but all she could manage was a quiet gurgle. Fu-san, please do not speak. We're here to get you to safety, the man known only as Karasu said, picking Fu up and turning to run with the woman wearing the cat mask at his side. Fu watched as she was carried away, the three figures getting smaller. With a grimace, Jiraiya prepared himself. From the memories of his recently destroyed shadow clone, he reported, Kakuzu lives up to his reputation. He's summoned some types of familiars to help him. Counted at least 4 of them, each using a different element. His partner wasn't with him though. Yugito drew her katana and slowly assumed a combat stance. Quietly, how long do we fight them? She questioned. Alongside him, Asuma had drawn his twin knives and held them in a ready stance. Until they're either dead or I say otherwise. We need to give Karasu and Neko as much time as possible to escape, Jiraiya gave an order. Before long, they noticed Kakuzu moving toward them and halting short of the location where they knew the boundary between Taki and Hai no Kuni was. The things Jiraiya had described were not visible, but Hidan did show up shortly after, his eyes appearing unharmed. Kakuzu examined the 3 people slowly, stopping and narrowing his eyes at the figure in the robe. Her features were difficult to see because of her hood and the shadows the treetops cast. But something he recognized from a bingo book sparked his memory when he saw the twin katars. Jiraiya of the Sanin. Asuma Sarutobi. And would that perhaps be the Nibi Jinchuriki with you? He inquired. The Konoha shinobi did not respond, but Yugito grimaced inwardly at being recognized, until it was impossible to keep them from knowing who she was. She had hoped to keep them from finding out. Kakuzu just went on. I must say, I'm very surprised. I didn't expect to see 2 very valuable bounties in front of me. And if you are the Nibi Jinchuriki, he said as he gazed at Yugito, then my friend here has been very eager to meet you. With a smile on his face, Hidan lifted his scythe and began to lick the blade's edge. Everyone winced when they saw a cut on his tongue, but he didn't hesitate to hurt himself. He stepped forward slowly and said, Hey, just my fucking luck. You lost your prize Kakuzu, but looks like I can get mine. Jiraiya attempted to incite them into battle by saying, if you want to have a go, then come on then. Though he had no idea what Hidan was capable of, he felt pretty sure he could take care of Kakuzu, given that the former Taki.nin had already used up a good deal of chakra chasing Fu. A small portion of his chakra had been used by him, but not nearly as much as Kakuzu's. Hidan positioned himself as though he was going to charge, but Kakuzu intervened. Unfortunately Hidan, while I'd love nothing more than to see you ripped into pieces yet again, this is not a fight we'll likely win. Trying to pull away from Kakuzu, Hidan growled, fuck you Kakuzu, I can take them all. No, you cannot. Jiraiya there would probably destroy you. The other 2 you might have a better chance against, even together, but you'd never survive all 3 of them. And in my current state, well, let's just say I'd gladly enjoy sitting back and watching you finally die. You might even finally go meet that beloved deity of yours, said Kakuzu. Hidan angrily yelled back, fuck you, you fucking greedy blasphemer. I swear I'll enjoy the day I finally get to rip your guts out and choke the bitch out of you. The 3 Konoha shinobi began to perspire a little bit at the 2. Kakuzu sarcastically remarked, I eagerly await the day, Hidan, before turning to face Jiraiya. It seems the day is yours. But do not feel safe in your victories so far, Jiraiya. Akatsuki will get what it wants. You have not truly faced what our organization is capable of. And as for you, Yugito ni, he continued, turning to the woman in a hooded. If you wish to prolong your life, I suggest you remain hidden behind Konoha's walls. We will be watching and waiting. With that, Hidan growled fiercely and leveled his scythe at Yugito as Kakuzu turned and started to walk away. He said, "Know this, cat bitch. I'll enjoy watching every moment of your life draining from your fucking pathetic body," before turning to walk away from Kakuzu while cursing his partner non-stop. He then sheathed his scythe on his back. After a while, the three Konoha shinobi finally relaxed, waiting for any indication of an impending surprise attack or their return. Jiraiya said, "Let's get going," letting the two of them go ahead and then darting up behind to act as a rear guard. During their first silent journey, Yugito couldn't help but worry about the final remarks made by the Akatsuki members. At last, she expressed her thoughts. "Jiraiya Sama, how strong is this group?" she worriedly inquired. As they continued to tree hop off in the same direction that the two Anbu had gone with Fu, Jiraiya sighed in exhaustion. "I'm not exactly sure," he remarked. "I've got information on several of their members, but not all of them. I know about Hidan's name and where he's from, but none of my informants know exactly what he's capable of. Just that it's related to some cult that grants him powers. Of the remainder of Akatsuki, it's been easy enough to gather information on all their members except 3. My best informant has told me that he can't deliver any information on them yet, beyond that the leader of the group is incredibly powerful. Far more so than any of the other Akatsuki members. And that was putting it mildly. His informant, Itachi, had told him how the Akatsuki leader, who went by only the name Pain, had completely destroyed him when he first joined the group. Itachi was unable to assist him all, and the only thing that had spared the Uchiha's life was the possibility of his being useful to the Akatsuki. Even though Jiraiya was aware that he might experience a similar outcome if he faced Itachi, the potential power of this so-called pain alarmed him, particularly since he had been the one to not only drive out but also execute Hanzo the Salamander, the erstwhile head of AIM who had bestowed the Sannin with their title upon them when they had escaped his grasp as juveniles. He shook his head, pushing away ideas like that. For now, suffice to say that Akatsuki is a danger that you and Naruto will need to be extremely wary of. With them seemingly starting to become more active now, I think we'll need to make sure the two of you have a proper understanding of the members we do know about, so you're not caught off guard in combat with them." Yugito nodded, keeping his attention on the path in front of him until Asuma interrupted. "Well, this mission could have gone a bit better. Taki might try to raise a fuss over this now, especially if Akatsuki tries threatening them to get Fu back. And Iwarakumo could try to spin this in some way to justify attacking us. Taki can try all they want, but all we would need to do is present Fu and allow her to share her side of the story. Taki wouldn't have a leg to stand on if everyone knew they sold out their own Jinchuriki. And from what Hokage Sama told me, we've still got enough dirt on Kumo to keep them quiet. Iwa though, they might try something. Or they might not. They took a hell of a beating in the last war and I doubt they're too eager to start another one, even without the Yondaime around. But we'll have to see where the chips fall. That's how the world works," Jiraiya replied. "Still, we've got 1/3 of the Jinchuriki now. I doubt anyone is truly going to be okay with that," Asuma said. "That's clearly going to affect the balance of power, especially since 2 of them are among the 3 highest numbered and potentially most powerful of the Biju. I doubt we're going to hear the end of this." As the 3 of them hurried to catch up with their friends, Jiraiya said, "Trust me, Asuma-san. We might catch some flack, but this is almost certainly better than whatever Akatsuki has planned. Now let's get a move on. I want to make sure that Fu-girl is alright and then get her back to Konoha as quickly as possible." The office of Inoichi sighed softly and took a seat, turning to face the chair across from the one he was using for his current patient. He detested days such as these. Days when a child, too young to be worrying about puberty and growing up, was thrown headlong into the world of fighting and death instead of an adult in need of his psychiatric assistance. However, that was the life of individuals who opted to become shinobi. "Naruto-san, how are you feeling today?" he inquired. Naruto inhaled deeply. He said in a low voice, "Better. I still am having some moments of anger or despair, but I'm better." Understandable. While the immediate, raw emotions are fading, they're still present at the moment. And the main problem is not something that will quickly fade away or be dealt with, Inoichi smiled dryly. "I wouldn't be needed if mental and emotional problems could be dealt with so easily." At that, the blonde genin gave a small nod. "Yes, even though it could be less taxing on individuals," he muttered as he closed his eyes. Inoichi murmured to herself. "Perhaps. Or perhaps not. Painful memories and experiences are never fun, but they can be beneficial. Provided of course that you can face and overcome them. They can help you grow more resilient, much like how physical training can help your body become tougher and more durable." "I suppose so," Naruto replied. "But it feels a lot worse though. When I'm out training, I can endure the physical strain and pain. This, though, I don't know. Inoichi noted, it is a greater challenge, but it can have a far greater impact as well. Tell me though, what is hardest about it? Why do you feel it's so much harder? Naruto paused, partly because he was trying to phrase things correctly in his head and partly because he felt ashamed discussing topics that were typically kept close to the vest. I guess it's something Hokage Sama said to me, about how I should try to forgive him, Naruto uttered, his voice faltering as he nearly said Jiraiya's name due to a surge of emotions. I mean, he didn't say I had to forgive him, he said I should try to listen to his side of the story and try to understand things from his point of view. That I shouldn't hold on to these feelings inside me. At those words, Inoichi saw Naruto gently touch his chest. He could only speculate as to what Naruto was considering at the time. About the hurt that was building inside of him, the raging fire of rage that, depending on how intensely Naruto felt this, might even turn into hatred. Inoichi gave a slight wave of his hand, signaling to Naruto to carry on without saying anything. Naruto said, raising the volume and pitch of his voice a little. I just can't see how I could possibly do that though, he said. No matter what that bastard side of the story is, can it really be enough to try and excuse him not being there for me all these years? I feel like no one is considering my side of the story, what I went through. Naruto got up and started pacing angrily as his voice heated up, and yeah, things got better for me, but they were still really horrible for the first few years there. Literally my earliest memories are of loneliness, sadness, and fear. What kind of memories are those supposed to be? And I'm just supposed to forgive Jiraiya? I'm just supposed to listen to him and pretend everything is fine? Inoichi said, you were able to give the Suna Jinchuriki a chance, even though he had done nothing to deserve your forgiveness, which made Naruto hesitate. The blonde young Jinchuriki gave a brief grimace. I mean, yeah, but he didn't actually do anything except try to fight and kill me. And that's part of the shinobi lifestyle. Sure, he threatened people I care about, but he never actually did anything to me except fight me. What Jiraiya did is worse. Far worse, Naruto argued. That is true as well. But at the same time, consider this. Gaara likely would have killed you without remorse, as well as your friends, comrades, and this entire village. From what I understand, he would have done so happily. Jiraiya hurt you, but it was never done intentionally or maliciously. The pain he caused was far worse than what Gaara could do to you, but it was never his intent, Inoichi replied. Now please do not mistake my words to say he did nothing wrong. But if you can forgive one person who would have not been remorseful at all in what he did to you, can you not do the same for someone else who is? With a grimace, Naruto took a slow seat. His voice was strained and tired as he asked, so what then? I should just listen to what he has to say and forgive him? Extremely, Inoichi leaned over and remarked. Naruto-san, let me tell you what I think forgiveness is. Forgiveness is how we heal our emotional and mental wounds. But it is not something that can be forced. Consider this. As he spoke, he sat back in his chair. When you are injured, 3 things generally might happen with your wound. With proper treatment and time, the injury can fade away, leaving little traces of it behind. You might have a faint scar or phantom pain, but nothing that really will affect you. Or the wound might be too deep, and even with treatment and healing a scar is left behind, visible and glaring to everyone. A constant reminder of what happened, something you can't quite ever let go of. Or the wound could become infected if you don't treat it at all, becoming a poisonous sore that continually racks your body with pain and disease until either extreme treatments are necessary, or you die. Inoichi said, emotional wounds are the exact same. When you are able to let go of what happened, allow yourself to properly heal, then at worst the incident leaves behind a faint scar and occasional bits of pain that you might be able to ignore one day. If you learn to cope but cannot truly let go of what happened, it instead leaves behind an emotional scar, one that changes you and that everyone around you can see. And when you can never let go, but continue to allow the pain and anger to fester in your heart and mind, well, I think the likes of Orochimaru are a good example of where that can lead. With a grimace, Naruto turned his head away. I guess I can understand that. Forgiveness, true forgiveness, is our way of finally healing on an emotional level. It's not enough to simply say the words and pretend nothing happened. That's not forgiveness and not true healing. Real forgiveness is when you can let go of what was done to you. It doesn't mean you need to forget what was done, but it is you being able to find it within yourself to not hold on to the pain and anger you feel regarding that person and what happened. Which is also why it is not easy and why no one is expecting you to just forgive Jiraiya Sama for what happened. You have to be able to find it within yourself to be willing to move on. And that takes time. If you don't let go of it, your emotions can fester and poison yourself. If you try to rush it, or if you refuse to let go of all of it, it can scar horribly, leaving you altered. But if you can give yourself the proper time to deal with things, handle your emotions, and find the strength and will to let go and move forward, that is when you can forgive. And that is when you're healed. At least, that is my perspective on it, Inoichi finished with a smile. Naruto nodded slowly at what he said. You are the one who would know best, he sighed and closed his eyes. I'm just not sure how to do that. How'd I get to that point? I can't tell you how to specifically get there. It's different from person to person and situation to situation. What I can do is offer you advice on what might help. For starters, I obviously can offer you clinical advice and aid. That is my job. But those who can help you more are the people around you that you care about. The ones who know you best. Who you feel like you can share anything with. So my advice is to speak to them as well. Talk to them. Hear what they have to say. And in time, if you feel up to it, then listen to what Jiraiya Sama has to say as well. Maybe you won't be able to truly forgive him. Maybe you will. But I think at least understanding his side of things, at some point, can help you move forward, Inoichi replied. Do you think that will help? I believe it will, Naruto said as he slowly got to his feet. Thank you, Inoichi-san. His words made Naruto blink. You're welcome, Naruto. It's the least I can do after what you've done for the village and my daughter, he said. You've been a good teammate for her. I've seen how much she's grown since joining your team. And I know you and Hinata-san support her constantly. So I'm happy to help you like you've helped her. Well, I think Anko Sensei accomplished more than I did, Naruto said, half smiling. Inoichi wrote up a slip and said, I would like one last official appointment in a month's time, just to see how things are progressing. Otherwise, my office doors are open if you feel the need to speak with me immediately. Or come by the flower shop as well, if I'm not here. Naruto bowed to Inoichi-san and repeated, thank you. Before Naruto turned and departed, Inoichi returned the bow. Naruto stepped out into the open, pausing briefly to think about what Inoichi had said to him. He understood it, but he also knew that attempting to carry out Inoichi's advice would not be simple. Even after spending some time talking to Inoichi and his friends, he was still filled with strong emotions. His tantrum from a few minutes ago was evidence of that. However, the logical side of him knew that he couldn't allow them to stay. Not only because of Kyuubi, but also because of how they could impact and alter him. Having experienced this while training with the Biju's energy, he knew that his anger made it easier to rile up the chakra. Furthermore, he had no desire to return to his agreement with Kyuubi or allow it to consume him. Naruto inhaled deeply and raised his gaze to the heavens. The sky was a vivid blue, interspersed with a few clouds. The whole scene was picturesque because of the warm, bright light of the sun. He couldn't help but smile for a little while at that point because he felt somewhat at ease and warm. Stepping forward, Naruto nodded and decided that he would try to start moving on from what had happened to him. After all, it was a new day today. It was yet another gorgeous, sunny day in Konoha. A semblance of normalcy had returned to the village, even though repairs were still being made and some residents were still grieving for those who had lost their lives in combat against the shinobi of Suna and Oto. Although many people were still thinking about the invasion, there was still a tense undercurrent, and they were finally starting to get back to their regular routines. But it was turning out to be an interesting day for Raphael. After reading all that Anko had left for him, he was heading to the place she had asked him to go. He frowned as he made his way through Konoha's streets, toward one of the outer districts of the village's urban area, feeling a little constrained by the clothes he was wearing. He wore a more formal kimono and hakama instead of his assassin robes or the more relaxed clothes he'd found for off-duty hours. Something contained within the scroll that Anko had given him, as part of a storage seal. He stopped to try to adjust his clothes in a subtle way, but he couldn't help but wonder what exactly his girlfriend was up to. He was curious as to why precisely she appeared hesitant and embarrassed during her visit with him the day before, given what he had read. Though he couldn't see why she should be, he finally decided that since this seemed important to her, he would try his best not to make a scene or ruin anything. Once his adjustments were complete, he moved forward and soon found himself in the general vicinity of his destination. He was past the suburban looking part of the village and out of the city, where some of the craftspeople and clan compounds that needed more open space were situated. There were several shinobi training grounds out here, as well as some park-like spaces constructed for leisure. Raphael made his way into one of the latter, through a stand of trees and into a well-kept garden. He was greeted almost immediately upon entry by an unremarkable woman dressed in a kimono who bowed to him. She nodded to him in return, and he followed her without saying anything. The two strolled leisurely through the garden park. with the only sounds coming from a tiny brook that flowed to a well-kept pond and the whisper of a light breeze blowing through the trees and plants. The occasional birdsong or the gentle sound of a fish briefly breaching the pond's surface were the only other sounds. After a short while, the woman had guided him to a large patch of grass with a blanket spread out on it. Adjacent to the mentioned blanket was a brazier that held a kettle in place. A tiny table with the necessary items for the tea ceremony Enko had invited him to was placed on the blanket. But instead of going to the side, the guide told him to wait. A short while later, Enko emerged from behind a tree. And when he saw her, Raphael's breath caught. Enko was dressed in a tan and orange feminine kimono. She had a little makeup on her face, nothing special, but it was noticeable given how often he saw her without makeup. Her hair had also been tamed into a small bun at the back of her head rather than in its typical short, spiky ponytail. He was also taken aback by her expression. There was a calm, gentle smile in place of her typical arrogant or flirty one. It was as though I was staring at a completely different person. He bowed back to Enko as she approached him slowly, trying to recall the steps he had read in the scroll she had given him. It was difficult because a portion of his mind was still obsessed with how different she looked and behaved. She gestured to a nearby stone basin, and Raphael moved to wash his hands and rinse his mouth without saying anything. After that, he knelt beside her on the blanket, taking off his sandals and placing the table in between them. First of all, she bowed to him again and said, "Thank you for coming," and he did the same. He responded, slowly putting himself straight as Enko followed suit. "I am honored to be here," he said. After that, they were silent while Enko started the tea ceremony. With only the faintest rustle of Enko's kimono as she moved, softly retrieving and plating a daifuku, a soft rice cake ball wrapped around a filling, and the quiet crackle of the brazier as the fire inside burned, Raphael watched in silence. She bowed softly as she placed the plate in front of him, which he accepted, and took out the kaishi, the special paper napkin that was intended to contain the candy, from his kimono's pocket. While he ate it quietly, he observed Enko using the same well-practiced motions to prepare him a small sake saucer after he finished the daifuku. She gave it to him again with a bow, and this time he accepted it and drank it slowly. Enko finished, then started the slow, ceremonial cleaning of the utensils. Raphael was mesmerized by Enko's deliberate movements because of how naturally they appeared to come to him. Her hands and arms were not tense while she worked, and her face was not showing signs of intense concentration. As she finished cleaning every item and put them back, she had that same calm expression from the beginning. Then the process of making tea started. Enko took the kettle from the brazier and slowly poured in the water after carefully ladling the green tea powder into the tea bowl and gently grinding it down to make sure it did not clump. After that, she took up the chasen, a tiny bamboo whisk, and used it to stir the tea until all of the green tea powder had dissolved into the water that was simmering. After mixing the tea, she put down the whisk and carefully wiped the rim of the bowl with the previously used cloth one last time. Then she bowed and held it out to him. He took it carefully, returned her bow, held it up to her, turned it slowly, and took his first sip. He was taken aback by how much richer the tea seemed to taste as it passed over his tongue in comparison to other green teas he had previously consumed. Was it because this one had been made just for him, with all of the love and attention to detail? Was it the ambiance, the feeling of calm and peace that made him notice the flavor more? All he could gather was that this teacup held something more. He eventually finished it, lowering the bowl slowly. She took it carefully as he turned it around and returned it to her. He waited for her to finish cleaning every utensil before he spoke. Maintaining the formalities of the tea ceremony, he asked, "Will you honor me by letting me inspect them?" She nodded and said, "Of course," letting him carefully pick up each utensil. As he had read in the scroll, this was all part of the tea ceremony, a way to honor and respect the host. But as he handled each piece of equipment with care and observed the attention to cleaning and upkeep, he also felt compelled to do so. Enko's attention to detail in both the preparation and serving of the tea as well as the maintenance of her utensils demonstrated to him how much this meant to her. The ceremony came to an end when he finished and gave her back the last utensil. The two then bowed. Enko led him to the unremarkable woman's location a short distance away after they both stood and put on their sandals. With a final bow, Enko said, "Thank you," and followed the woman as she led him out. The woman stopped him near the entrance to the park. The woman said, "Please wait here. She'll be along shortly," before vanishing into a cloud of smoke and turning out to be a shadow clone the entire time. Following his instructions, Raphael waited for a few minutes until he noticed Enko walking over and stealthily tucking a scroll into her kimono's sleeves. She hesitated when she saw him, displaying emotion and reluctance for the first time, and then she moved to approach him. When she got closer, He grinned at her. She stood in front of him, and he said, "That was quite something." I was honestly quite surprised, but I greatly enjoyed it. Anko gave it a quick glance down, appearing almost ashamed. After a short while, she quietly said, "I don't usually do that for most people. Most everyone is so used to, well, the other me. The cocky loudmouth flirt. I'm usually scared to show this side of me." With a gentle touch on her chin that made her look up at him, the assassin asked, "Is that why you were so nervous when you asked me to meet you here? Did you think I wouldn't like this?" Anko blurted out, her fears taking over, "I know it's stupid. It's not like I suddenly am admitting I'm into really kinky sex, or that I like both guys and girls, or I'm actually a bloodthirsty sadist or anything. But still, I felt nervous sharing something so personal and so opposite of who I usually am. I was scared of what you might think," she said. In response, Raphael pulled her into a tender embrace. She slumped against him, her head resting on his chest as she felt the warmth and comfort of his arms around her. For a few moments, he just held her in that position before saying anything. She looked up at him again as he said, "I'm sorry that you ended up feeling that way. And I'm grateful that you wanted to share this part of yourself with me. This was quite an experience. I'm happy to learn about another part of you. And that you care about me enough to want to share something so special with me." She simply turned red and pressed her head against his chest once more. Even as she gave him a hug in return, she muttered, "I feel like such an idiot now. Like I got worked up for nothing." He laughed and embraced her, allowing her some time to gather her thoughts. When she eventually withdrew, he simply smiled at her once more. He put out his arm to her and asked, "If I may ask, what made you interested in these tea ceremonies?" After she accepted, they started to leave the park. Anko looked down slightly and said, "It was not that long after. Well, after he betrayed me," knowing that she was talking about her treacherous former sensei. Raphael scowled at her statement. "I had to take part in one during an undercover mission. I found myself enjoying the peace and serenity that was part of the ceremony. That one was even more formal and took a lot longer than this one did. But I felt relaxed for the first time in a long while. So, I began looking into them, learning how to host them, and the more I did, the more I enjoyed it. The calm focus and attention to every detail, all in an atmosphere that seems to be meant to invoke an aura of tranquility and spiritual cleansing. In a way, I think it's partly responsible for helping me at least somewhat get over what happened to me. But I was also so nervous and scared about sharing this side of me with anyone because When he heard the lilt in her voice, the tone of doubt as she decelerated, Raphael stopped. She looked down at the road and then spoke again. "I was scared of being vulnerable again. Of leaving myself open to being hurt, like I was after his betrayal." Raphael turned to face her and asked, "What made you willing to let me know about this?" As she raised her head to meet his. She muttered, "Because I realized that I was willing to be vulnerable around you. You nearly died to protect me, you saved my life. And I realized while we were in the hospital that I trust you. Not just as a comrade or a leader or even a friend. I trust you completely. In a way I only felt when I was Orochimaru's student, and I believed I could utterly trust him. After his betrayal I didn't think I could feel that way again, but I feel that way even more with you than I ever did with him." She had a slight tear in her brown eyes and a quiver in her voice as she finished. Observing her, hearing the emotion in her voice, and observing the vulnerability in her posture, Raphael took it all in. She returned the kiss, leaning into him and holding onto his kimono as he slowly leaned in and kissed her on the lips, drawing her closer to him. Unlike the previous kisses they had exchanged, this one was unique. The others had been more motivated by lust or attraction, which was frequently intended to fuel their desire for one another. There was nothing like this kiss. Anko felt something different as she felt her body pressing against him and as his lips met hers. A need, a want, to be demanded and to demand him back. A fearful hope that he felt the same way about her, and a desire to be with him forever. She had never felt safer, but she also felt extremely vulnerable as she pressed against him, keeping the kiss going and feeling his arms envelop her. Tears filled her eyes as they gasped for breath and she looked up at him. She was happy when he returned her smile, which was gentle and kind. Unaware of it, Raphael had experienced the same emotion as Anko. He'd started to realize how much he felt the same way about her as he'd watched her reveal to him this hidden part of her soul. This part that was filled with pain and fear, but he had also heard her speak of her trust in him. About how much he wanted to be with her, about how much he trusted her, how much he desired her happiness. And he was starting to realize how he felt about her in that kiss. He wasn't just infatuated with her. He was prepared to give his life for her. He had positioned himself to be attacked by her. Furthermore, she had battled and almost perished in defense of him. Gazing down at her, he noticed her lips slightly parted, her cheeks reddened from heavy breathing. As he used his thumb to gently dab a few tears from her face, he thought he was much the same. At last, he said, "I feel the same for you, Anko." They had no idea if they could truly declare their love for one another. They had been allies and friends for many years, but during the last year or so, they had developed a romantic interest in one another. After just 1 month of dating, they weren't sure if their feelings for one another could be classified as love, even though they both knew they felt more than just lust or desire. However, they were aware that they had a strong attraction to each other. Anko shivered a little and leaned in to cuddle up to him. She finally said, "Can we go back to your place? I want to be with you, someplace quiet, where we won't be disturbed," she said at last. With a nod, Raphael embraced her. Whispering to her, "As you wish," he embraced her tightly. However, the two stayed there for a little while longer, just taking in this intimate moment. In another scene, Naruto grinned excitedly as he opened Gonzo's store. Gonzo had sent him a note earlier that day informing him that the unique project they had been working on together was finished. If it was everything he had imagined, he was excited to see it in action. Naruto came in while Gonzo was occupied with drawing something. The blacksmith raised his head and smiled. He pushed the sketch aside and said, well, glad you got my message. Always a pleasure to see one of my favorite customers. I think I finally fixed all the kinks in the prototype. I've got it set up in the back to test out, and if everything works, then it should be ready to present to Raphael.san. Naruto stepped forward excitedly, nodding. That's great to hear. So you finally figured out how to solve the connection problem. They walked into the back area, where Gonzo kept his forging and a testing ground for some of his armor, weapons, and other creations. Gonzo nodded. I think I've solved it. So far, I haven't had any problems testing it out. All that leaves is a final test and assessment from you and Raphael.san. Naruto observed the man proceed to a workbench and arrange a hidden blade bracer on it. The blacksmith created his own experimentation bracer to test out new potential gadgets or upgrades for the assassins ever since Raphael had shown Gonzo the hidden blade bracers so that he could order the components. As of right now, this one was fitted with a slightly thicker hidden blade mechanism. Just enough for Naruto to notice the difference, not enough for anyone else to notice. As Gonzo raised it to his lips, he could feel his excitement rising. He said, "Are you ready?" With a nod, Naruto took off his left bracer to test the experimental one. After 30 minutes, Naruto smiled and gave Gonzo the prototype's money. Thanks again, Gonzo.san. If Raphael-sensei likes it as much as I do, we might need more of them. It should be useful, no doubt about that, the blacksmith said, grinning in satisfaction that the prototype had functioned flawlessly. Holding out a somewhat bulky package to Naruto, Gonzo said, "Can you also give this to Raphael.san? It's a delivery he ordered before the finals, and they only arrived the other day. Haven't had a chance to bring them to him." Nodding, the young assassin accepted it. With the package and his prototype in hand, he said, "Sure, I'll give it to him as soon as I see him. Thanks again, Gonzo.san," and walked out. Naruto immediately headed for the warehouse hideout as soon as he was outside. He assumed that Anko would leave the package at the warehouse with a note, as Hinata had informed him that Anko had a significant appointment with Raphael. And then hold off on displaying the prototype until the following day. He had been thinking about it since the end of the academy years, and he had mentioned it to Gonzo at some point following the mission to Nami. He couldn't wait to show it off to the others now that it was finished. He was concerned, though, that Raphael might not approve of it. Though he didn't believe this to be the case, anything that would help them in their assassinations would be beneficial. A tiny part of him continued to worry that it might not fit or that it would conflict with something pertaining to the Brotherhood that he was unaware of. Nevertheless, he ignored those worries and concentrated on how excited he was to present what he hoped would be a useful addition to the Brotherhood. Gates of Konoha. T. That's Konoha? Fu inquired, gazing in wonder at the enormous village walls and gates. Taki was a small, hidden village with a naturally formed sanctuary made of trees and cave walls that provided the town with picturesque surroundings. But it was nothing compared to the magnificent scene in front of her. The village was encircled by an enormous wall that was so tall that she had to tilt her head back in order to see the top of it from her current position. She could easily see the enormous wooden doors, each about the thickness of a man with broad shoulders, when the gate was open. What had drawn her attention, though, was what was beyond the gate. The enormous village, with more buildings than she had ever seen in her life, was breathtaking. She could hear people going about their daily business in the distance, and every now and then she could see ninja darting along the rooftops. and there was a huge mountain in the distance that overlooked the village with its 4 enormous stone faces. She pointed to the mountain her orange eyes were glued to and asked, in awesome voice, "Who are they?" Yugito moved to the side of her fellow Jinchuriki, grinning. "That is the Hokage monument, and those are the Hokage who founded, led, and watched over this village," she replied. "Hashirama Senju, Tobarama Senju, Hiruzen Sarutobi, and Minato Namikaze." Fu looked at it for a moment and then said, I see," turning back to the village. "There must be so many people here." Asuma joined them and said, "There are. Though, to be fair, I think we might actually be only the 3rd largest village in terms of population. Iwa and Kumo both had larger populations last I heard, and after the recent invasion." "Well," he said, glancing at some of the bottles still. Visible damage. Though not as bad as it had been back then, there were still sporadic reminders of what had transpired. Jiraiya waved his hand in front of them, indicating. He called out as he led them through the gates, "Less chat. We need to see Hokage Sama quickly and inform him of what went down. Fu-san, please stay close to me." "Okay." Fu nodded and hastily pulled up the hood of the cloak she had been given. A lone Chunin gate guard momentarily stopped the group. But in contrast to normal times, there were 10 shinobi instead of the customary 2 or 4 standing guard at the gate. The person who intervened surveyed the group before focusing on the hooded Fu. "Jiraiya. Sama, welcome back," he greeted the Sannin member, turning to face him. "Identification, please." In a moment, the Konoha shinobi gave him their IDs, and Jiraiya added a piece of extra paper. He nodded to Fu as the Chunin looked at her and then back down at the IDs and paper. "Mission statement from Hokage Sama that we were to escort a VIP directly to him," he said. He nodded after a short while and returned them all. He said, "You're cleared," and moved aside to let the group go by. As an extra precautionary measure, 2 Anbu who were stationed nearby started to quietly follow them. Fu was told earlier to keep a low profile, but she couldn't resist taking in the sights of the village as she looked around. This gave her a far better view of the actual buildings. The majority of them appeared to be home to different stores that catered to both locals and tourists. Some small shops sold trinkets and other random items, while others sold a variety of foods that were convenient to eat on the go. With its tiny size and sparse population, it was a far cry from Taki. Taki would have a few stalls with food and merchandise for sale as well as part-time artisans working at their crafts. There were a ton of stores selling a wide variety of goods here, and the number of people had increased. After being cooped up in their homes for days or weeks while the rebuilding was underway, she moved to the side as some kids ran past, laughing and playing. Men and women walked from store to store, some going from one to the other window shopping, others walking deliberately in the direction of their destinations. The company eventually changed into a marketplace that catered more to large-scale businesses or the local population. When Fu noticed how many people were there, she found herself stopping in shock. This was just a fraction of Konoha proper. The market area alone appeared to be nearly half as large as Taki had been. Having spent the majority of her life close to Taki, she had never seen anything like it, so it really astounded her. She was nudged back to reality by Yugito, who was guiding her with gentleness. They hurried through the village, the former Taki Jinchuriki nodding. They did not, however, proceed to the Hokage's tower. Jiraiya led them in the direction of the Anbu headquarters instead. At that point, Fu hesitated until Jiraiya gave her comfort. "It's for security measures. We need to make sure as few people know you're here as possible," he said quietly to her. Fu nodded, but she was still twitchy as they were led past multiple masked people who were observing them in silence into the building. Sarutobi was waiting for them when Jiraiya led them into what appeared to be a meeting room. "Mission accomplished, Hokage Sama," Jiraiya hurriedly advanced. "We recovered Fu, who was being pursued by 2 members of Akatsuki. We were able to avoid an altercation with them, but they, unfortunately, were able to identify Yugito-san, so they know she was present on the mission." The elderly Hokage looked at Yugito and silently nodded, noticing the scowl on the blonde's face. He turned to face Fu and said, "I see. Still, I'm glad to see the mission was a success. And you must be Fu-san." She lowered her hood and moved forward slowly. "Why? Yes, Hokage Sama. My name is Fu," she bowed nervously. Still, she found it impossible to look away from him. He appeared to be no more than an elderly gentleman, content to spend his days lounging by the fireside or regaling his grandkids with tales from his earlier years. But she was aware that this was no person to play around with. He might not have been well known to her, but she could still feel the power emanating from him. She shook herself free of her thoughts and went on quickly. I humbly ask for a asylum here in Konoha, as I was betrayed by members of my village. Sarutobi snapped his fingers and nodded. An Anbu materialized, handing him a scroll, a brush, and ink. He started to write, saying, "Please give me all the details about this betrayal." He already knew everything from the scroll he had received from Taki, so it was just a formality, but they had to do their part to make it appear as though this was an unplanned coincidence. Fu started rattling off the specifics right away. She told him the truth, but her voice was tinged with anxiety. On the way to Konoha, she had been informed that in order to support the narrative that Shibuki and Konoha had not planned for this and that her encounter with Konoha Shinobi was just a coincidental meeting, she would have to present a distorted account of how she learned of this betrayal. She then gave Sarutobi an edited account of what transpired, and he recorded it. Sarutobi finished writing down the details and gave her a weary grandfatherly smile. "I see. Thank you, Fu-san. For now, you'll be granted temporary asylum within Konoha until it is decided whether we can grant you full asylum or not. You'll be placed in a safe location, under guard. Please do not attempt to leave that location until directed otherwise," he said formally. "I am thankful we were able to rescue you in time, my dear. Welcome to Konoha." Fu looked at the others after giving a nod. Glancing back at him, she questioned, Hokage. Sama. W. Will any of them be guarding me? She would acknowledge that, in the current state of affairs, she found it difficult to trust anybody but the people who had been escorting her to Konoha. Sarutobi turned to face the two Anbu who had been silently standing at the back of the group and said, "I'm afraid that Yugito-san, Asuma-san, and Jiraiya-san won't be able to guard you at this time. They have duties they must return to. However, Karasu and Neko can be assigned to continue guarding you if you wish." Hesitantly, Fu glanced at them. She had conversed with the Konoha shinobi during the trip, but the two masked Anbu had stayed silent and distant. Any of the others, especially Yugito, would be preferable to her. However, they also had responsibilities. At last, she gave a nod. She bowed again and said, Thank you, Hokage. Sama. I'm sorry to be a bother." "It is no trouble, my dear. I will see to it that they each take shifts as part of your guard detail," he said with a grin. "Now, let us get you to your safe house. I'm sure you could use a nice long rest in bed and a warm meal." At that, Sarutobi snapped his finger and the previously mentioned Anbu reappeared, causing Fu to bow once more. "Please take Fu-san and Neko to Safe House 17. Then return and begin drafting a guard rotation for her. Neko, please ensure she is properly instructed on the safety protocols." Neko bowed and left the others behind, heading out with Fu and the ANBU. With a wearied sigh, Sarutobi sank back in his chair and took off the Hokage hat to massage his forehead. The older man's voice sounded tired and his posture made it easy to see how much mental strain he was carrying around. "We will need to be careful. Shibuki will need to play the part of an outraged leader, and I'm sure Iwarakumo, if not both, will attempt to use this in some way against us. And if it's not them, it'll be Danzo wanting to get his hands on Fu. He's already fuming over my denial of letting him train Naruto or yourself, Yugito-san, he said with his eyes closed. "Hokage. Sama, tell me what you need, and I'll do it," Yugito bowed. "Fu is my kin, like Naruto. And like him, I'll do whatever is in my power to help and protect her." Sarutobi smiled a little at her. "I appreciate the offer, Yugito-san. In truth, if it weren't for the fact that it might cause too many problems, I'd ask you to enlist our friend's aid in handling Danzo. As it is now, be ready when we finalize asylum procedures for Fu-san, he said, rising from his seat. "Jiraiya, I want you back out there as soon as possible. Get a read on the Akatsuki. See if you can't determine what their next move will be, or find out more about their members. The more we learn, the better prepared we can be to remove them from play. As for the rest of you, that will be all. Remember, what has happened here is an S-ranked secret. You cannot inform anyone of what happened until directed otherwise." With a nod, the other members of the Fu recovery group departed, and Sarutobi sighed again from exhaustion, knowing that this would soon be over. Tsunade had informed him of her plan to succeed him as Hokage, meaning that once he resolved a few outstanding issues, he could pass the mantle to her and eventually retire, enjoying a peaceful retirement with his loved ones. Until then, work demands, he thought drainedly as he got up to return to his office. Unknown place. A sequence of shadows emerged from within a pitch black room. With the exception of one who resembled a squat, hunched figure, and another who appeared to have odd growths surrounding his head, most of them had human features. But apart from their eyes, which were the only features visible through the shadows that made up their forms, not much could be done to identify these figures. One of the figures said, "Kakuzu, Hidan, report," in a monotone, masculine voice. His hair was spiky and his eyes were purple, with rings encircling the pupils. A shadow that resembled Kakuzu but was otherwise different spoke. "Our mission was a failure. Somehow the Jinchuriki managed to escape her escort and was found by a group of Konoha shinobi. We would have attacked and taken her, but Jiraiya of the Sannin was leading them. Not to mention that the Nibi Jinchuriki was with them as well." Some of them shifted in response to this news, and another figure gave the shadow with the purple eyes a quick glance, their own hazel eyes narrowing a little at the mention of Jiraiya. Ignoring them, the shadow with purple eyes fixed itself on Kakuzu. "You should have tried to obtain both." "I am disappointed," he stated, sounding as though he was still speaking in monotone. The shadow next to Kakuzu said, "I would have if Kakuzu hadn't been a fucking bitch," and Hidan's profanity soon revealed who he was. "I could have easily taken that fucking cat, no problem." Another person said, "Then you're as much of an idiot as you were vulgar," which made Hidan glare and forced him to look into a pair of Sharingan eyes. Jiraiya alone would have been a challenge, but Yugito Ni is no pushover. She is far more skilled than the Taki Jinchuriki. Another figure with a long ponytail and one visible eye asked, "And what's your excuse, Itachi-san? Your target wasn't much better than theirs, and he still got away. Maybe you ain't all you're cracked up to be, Though Itachi did not reply or show any sign of reaction, the tall figure beside him laughed softly. The shadow, Kisame, reached up to touch the boy's cheek and remarked, "The kid wasn't that bad. He gave me a nice little memento. Give him a few more years, he might be worth a damn." "Enough," uttered Pain, the first figure. "We must deal with this situation. Konoha now holds 3 of the Jinchuriki while successfully thwarting 2 of our attempts. We will need to rectify this situation." The figure with the hazel eyes next to him spoke up in a voice that was feminine. "We could try to incite Kumo and Iwa to act against Konoha. Both villages hold animosity towards Konoha for differing reasons. Konoha now having 3 Jinchuriki in their possession would most likely cause worry and unrest in those villages. And considering that those 3 are all the strongest villages, having them engage in conflict would certainly help our cause by weakening them." Pain gave a nod. "Agreement. We'll begin directing our agents to spread rumors to Iwa and Kumo about Konoha possibly building up its forces to invade them. It will hopefully cause them to launch pre-emptive strikes against Konoha, or at the very least attempt to force Konoha to give up some of the Jinchuriki they now have, making it easier for us to acquire them. Perhaps we could also send false reports to Konoha to get them to act against the other 2. "Probably not very likely," Itachi answered. "Konoha will act to defend itself, but they will attempt diplomacy before anything else. If there is an aggressor, it'll be one of the other villages." "Very well. In the meantime, we will wait and watch. If a chance arises to seize any of the Jinchuriki and their Biju, we will take it. But considering how much we have gained Konoha's attention, we must be discreet for now. Return to your missions," Pain instructed, dismissing them all. The room was silent and still as the different shadows came and went. Konoha's assassin warehouse sitting in one of the chairs in the warehouse's office area, Hinata grinned and said, "Sue. You seem to have had a good time yesterday, nay. Chan." With a mix of delight and amusement, the lavender-eyed girl observed her guardian, sensei, and elder sister figure. Anko had been acting very euphoric since her date with Raphael the day before. Hinata had been somewhat taken aback by Anko's apparent concern before the genin left for his training. By the time Anko completed her training, she had returned, leaving Hinata to wait and speculate as to what had been on Anko's mind. But when Anko did, at last, arrive home in the early evening, her worries vanished. She seemed to practically float into the living room, wearing the biggest smile. Nothing had seemed to depress the Junin's spirits since then. Not even Hinata's playful taunts or incisive questions. Anko was still just grinning at Hinata. She grinned and smirked at Hinata's abruptly uncomfortable expression. "Laugh all you want now, Hinata. Just wait till it's you and Naruto," she remarked. She just smiled as she sat back and closed her eyes, remembering yesterday all over again even as her heart began to race a little. She thought back to the walk that followed, how she had gone to his apartment for some privacy, and everything that had happened after. They hadn't gone beyond holding hands and kissing, though Anko would have been alright if things had gotten really physical. However, it did not make yesterday's events any less significant. It all felt so much more since she had revealed her tender side and he had accepted it. It was really difficult for her to put into words. Everything had simply felt greater than it had ever felt. She couldn't quite put into words how it felt, but the warmth from pressing against him, the feel of his lips on hers, and the tingling sensations from his touch all felt more powerful. With a tiny, dream-filled sigh, she opened her eyes to see Yugito standing there with a very sly smile. However, the Nibi's Jinchuriki remained silent, only winking at Anko as she took a seat. If anyone could likely relate to Anko's thoughts and feelings, it would be Yugito because of her own relationship with Iruka. Maybe after our meeting today, we should go grab some dango. Yugito grinned slyly at Anko. A hint to the purple-haired woman that she was ready for some girl talk and specifics. Anko answered, maybe, Kitty-chan. Maybe. Depends on if anything comes up in my schedule, but then she noticed the door opening. Raphael brought the package that Naruto had received the day before, and soon Kaseki, Naruto, and Raphael were inside. He paused, his face briefly lighting up with joy at the sight of Anko, whose own face followed suit. Naturally, they both instantly realized they were in the company of others and set aside their happiness for the time being. Hello everyone. I apologize for calling another meeting so soon, but there have been some unforeseen circumstances. One of these is this, he said, gesturing to the package he had just placed on his desk. I'll be going over that before turning things over to Naruto, who has something he wishes to share with us. Everyone cast a quick glance at Naruto, who for a brief while appeared anxious and ashamed as he sat next to Hinata. However, Raphael's opening of the package drew their attention back. An idea struck me while we were in Nami no Kuni, and I requested Gonzo-san purchase a set of items for us that I think will be beneficial to us in future missions, he said, shortly thereafter removing a blank mask. It was exactly like the ones used by the Anbu, with the exception that it had no features at all. At that, everyone leaned forward in sudden comprehension and interest. Anko inquired, recalling that he had considered it while glancing at one of the festival masks during the celebration in Nami. You're going with the mask idea you mentioned? Anko asked. Indeed. Gonzo-san was able to purchase several blank porcelain masks like the ones utilized by many of the Anbu or other elite shinobi in the various villages, Raphael said. As they are right now, they are usable. However, each of us should be able to add our own unique identity to them. Gonzo-san told me that he could easily alter each mask to its wearer's specifications. For instance, he said with a grin, grabbing a different mask. This mask, in contrast to the last one, was modified to resemble an eagle head with a short, hooked beak sticking out. The mask had a muted black and scarlet trim, a dull gray color, and the assassin emblem on the forehead. Raphael put it on his face and used a tiny bit of chakra to make it adhere to his skin. He said, and there we go, in a somewhat muffled voice as he raised his hood and used it to shadow the mask. Not bad, Kaseki remarked, surveying his overall appearance. Why the eagle, though? Raphael removed the mask by channeling his chakra once more into it. It's a bit of a symbol for the Brotherhood, he explained, placing the mask down on his desk. A few hundred years before my time, members of the Brotherhood would dip an eagle feather into the blood of their targets to signify a successful kill. It is said to tie into some traditions of our founders, though no one is quite sure. There's also the fact that a few members of the Brotherhood were gifted with seemingly supernatural senses, similar in a way to the bloodline abilities of some shinobi clans. Somehow, their senses were so much keener than that of a normal person that it gave them an almost supernatural ability to detect enemies, targets, allies, and even hidden secrets. Not everyone could do this, but those who could were taught how to use it in the field. This special ability was called Eagle Vision. I figured it only made sense that I should wear an eagle mask as the head of the Brotherhood here in the elemental nations. Turning, he took off the other masks. The rest of you are free to have yours customized however you want. As I said, Gonzo-san knows how to alter them, so feel free to take them to him with your chosen designs. They all moved forward, taking off their masks as they observed that the package still contained multiple blank copies. Each started thinking about the design they wanted as they examined their blank masks. But Raphael spoke again, dragging them out of their reverie. He sat behind the desk and said, "Now, I think Naruto also had some business for us today?" With a nervous sigh, Naruto placed the blank porcelain mask on the chair. Taking a deep breath to try to calm his nerves, he said, "Yes. I have a new possible weapon for us." He held out his left arm to reveal the hidden blade mechanism on the underside of his bracer. During the academy, I started to have an idea for a new possible addition to the hidden blade bracer. I talked to Gonzo-san about it, and he managed to finally create a working prototype of my idea. And yesterday, well, we finally tested it, he said. The standard hidden blade mechanism had an attachment added to it, making the mechanism somewhat bulkier now. A small circular disc with two dark wooden arms running the length of the mechanism on either side of a flat piece of metal was located just below the wrist. A thin, flat metal rod that ran beneath the flat disc at the front of the mechanism was resting on this flat section. Naruto grasped the back of this addition and used a handle to pull back, and with that, the two wooden arms shot forward, causing a string that was attached to them to become taut and revealing the contraption. A tiny crossbow attached to the underside of his bracer. Naruto nervously said, "I call it the Phantom Blade," holding his arms still so they could all look at it. He moved carefully past them to the training area and hurriedly aimed at one of the training dummies, saying, "It's basically like the poison dart but instantly lethal." He fired with the same motion used to activate his hidden blade. A small whip was heard from the tiny crossbow as it shot, and the dummy gave off a small hiss as it jerked violently. As Naruto pushed the switch back in, the launcher's arms quickly folded back into place, and all of them just about saw the small metal dart protruding from the dummy's neck. He nervously turned to face the other people, waiting to hear their comments. 2. A brief period of silence passed before one of them spoke. "Well, that was pretty cool," Anko remarked as he stood up to examine the dummy and remove the bolt from its neck. It was a straightforward metal rod with a sharpened end. It was designed not too dissimilar from a senbon, but it was a little bit heavier, thicker, and longer, and it had just one point. As the others gathered around Naruto, she gave it back to him. "It's definitely an intriguing gadget. May I?" Raphael inquired. In an instant, Naruto removed the bracer and gave it to Raphael, who immediately started examining the addition. "What made you think of it?" He pulled his crossbow from its back holster and watched as the bow arms clicked into place. "Well, it was your hidden pistol and my crossbow," he remarked. "You told us about the hidden pistol and how you didn't think you could recreate it here, and since I wasn't thinking about using the poison dart launcher, I thought perhaps I could try to create something that was a quieter version of your hidden pistol. The poison dart launcher doesn't have the power to deliver a killing blow with its projectile alone, so it wouldn't work for that. And then, when training with my crossbow, I started getting the idea for the Phantom Blade there." Naruto continued, and Raphael pulled on the switch to extend it once more. "I also was thinking about how it could be a good, discreet ranged killing method. The poison darts can take a bit too long if you're trying to kill quickly, while thrown knives can require too much movement and draw too much attention. The crossbow isn't stealthy at close ranges and can be a bit awkward to use in confined areas. This eliminates a lot of those problems. It doesn't have the range or power of a normal crossbow, but it's quieter, and it'll kill a target more quickly than slower acting poisons while drawing less attention than faster acting poisons. All without the movements needed with a thrown knife or shuriken that can draw attention to you." Examining it in its deployed state, Raphael nodded as he observed Naruto pull a tiny side lever to retract the bowstring and knocking mechanism before swiping the bolt in to reload it. He gave Naruto the bracer back after pushing the switch back in to retract it. He questioned inquisitively, "I am impressed. Though why did you not come forward with the idea earlier?" Naruto looked down and shuffled his feet. "I was nervous that it wouldn't work, or you'd think it was a dumb idea," he said. "So I wanted to see if the idea could work before I brought it up." Raphael did not blink before crouching in front of. "I can understand the first part there, but I wouldn't have done that, Naruto. I admit I would have rejected the idea if I thought it wouldn't be worth it, but only after considering it. I wouldn't have just rejected it out of hand." Sheepishly, Naruto looked up. "I just wanted to impress you with an idea that could be helpful." With a sigh and a smile, Raphael reached out and gently tousled Naruto's hair. He patted the bracer that had the Phantom Blade attached, saying, "This is an impressive and possibly quite useful tool. I'd like for you to talk to Gonzo-san about manufacturing some more of these attachments. You don't need to impress me, Naruto. You've already proven yourself to me so far." Hinata remarked, "I think I'd like to try it out. I imagine it'd be quite a surprise in the middle of the fig, or very effective for dealing with someone in hallways or narrow areas." Agreement. "I'd like to try it out as well," Kaseki added, making Naruto blush a little at their remarks despite feeling pleased that they supported and were excited about his idea. Raphael stood up and laughed, "Easy there, everyone. We'll get our chances soon enough. Once Gonzo-san has made more for us, that is. Good work, Naruto. But feel free to bring forward new ideas in the future. And the same for the rest of you," he concluded. He went back to his desk and placed the extra masks aside. "Now, with that out of the way, does anyone else have anything to add?" Raphael nodded, taking up a letter when no one else spoke. Holding up the letter, he said, "So that's it for this meeting. Anko. Chan, a moment please. When you get a chance, Can you have this sent to Ryushi.san since you were able to contact him about Hinata's training? I wanted to speak to him as soon as possible. Anko accepted the letter and nodded. She yelled, "You got it," as Yugito grabbed hold of her arm and she put the letter in one of her supply pouches. She grinned and said, "So, with this meeting done, I do believe it is time for some girl talk." She then grabbed Kaseki and the two of them dragged out of the warehouse, leaving Raphael, Hinata, and Naruto to laugh at their antics. As Naruto started to slowly stand up, Hinata intervened. "Well then," she said in a somewhat shy voice, "Naruto-kun, would you like to go get some lunch with me? My treat?" She waited for his response with a mixture of excitement, anxiety, and anticipation even though she knew it wasn't a date. Naruto grinned and said, "That sounds great," pausing briefly to take in her appearance. She felt more confident not to be hiding the seal, so she had stopped wearing the bandana. It was partially, but not completely, hidden by her bangs. He paused to admire her hair, which was now hanging looser than it had been for the most part. Her face was framed by a pair of side bangs, and the remainder of her indigo hair cascaded down to her shoulders. Her shy smile widened, her whole face glowing, and her light lavender white eyes had lit up at his acceptance. He wondered why he had never really noticed before how cute Hinata was when she smiled as he felt her grab his arm and begin to lead him away. "Council chambers, Konoha. Please take a seat, everyone," Sarutobi said, moving to the head of the table as the other shinobi council members had stood up and sat down. Not only were many of them taken aback to see Tsunade standing behind him, but they were also fascinated by the young girl with green hair who had accompanied him. Though a few, through connections or positions within Konoha, already knew who she was. Sarutobi got up and started. "I called this meeting to relay important information on events that have recently transpired. For those of you wondering about our guest here, this is Fu, Ataki Kunoichi, who recently was brought to Konoha seeking asylum. She is also the Jinchuriki of the Nanabi." The shocking news was met with immediate murmurs from the clan heads, with Shikaku Nara letting out a tired and quiet, troublesome. Before going into further detail, Sarutobi waited for the murmuring to stop. Fu was recently made aware of attempts by elements of Taki to betray her to a dangerous group of S-ranked missing.nin. She was able to escape the shinobi escorting her to a handoff with members of this organization and came across a patrol of our shinobi, where she made her initial plea for asylum. They brought her in successfully, but not before encountering the missing.nin sent to acquire her. He went on, holding up the letter. "Earlier today, Taki sent a letter to us demanding that Fu be returned to them immediately. While I personally do not believe that to be a wise choice as it would likely result in her being taken by this group of missing, I recognize that this is something that should be discussed." After a few moments of silence, Shikaku leaned forward and let out a sigh. "Hokage Sama, this group of rogue shinobi you're talking about, it's the Akatsuki group, right? The ones who went after Naruto Uzumaki recently?" The elderly Hokage nodded in agreement. "You are correct, Shikaku-san. During the recent mission undertaken by Naruto Uzumaki and Jiraiya, two members of this Akatsuki attempted to capture Naruto. They were identified as Itachi Uchiha and Kisame Hoshigaki, who infiltrated the village initially and then left in pursuit of Naruto." Makoto winced a little at the mention of Itachi, recalling not only her son's betrayal of her but also his more recent attack on Sasuke. Even with their past close relationship, Itachi and Sasuke's willingness to do that was still difficult for her to accept. Then Sarutobi pulled her out of her reverie. "The two shinobi who pursued Fu have been identified as Kakuzu, formerly of Taki, and Hidan, formerly of Yugakure no Sato, village hidden in the hot springs." When they heard the name Kakuzu, there was a commotion among them because the man was well known for trying to kill Shodai Hokage Hashirama Senju. Sume scowled as she raised her voice. She continued, making Sarutobi smile a little, saying, "How in the hell is one of them Kakuzu? The man would have to be far older than you are, Hokage Sama. No offense." "No offense taken, Sume-san. To answer your question, I am not certain. It is believed he acquired some type of forbidden jutsu that allows him to continue living well past a normal lifespan, but we know little else. His companion Hidan is a relative unknown to us. Still, considering he is working alongside the likes of Kakuzu, Itachi, and Kisame, we cannot underestimate his capabilities," he said, receiving a few nods from everyone. "Okay, so sending Fu back to Taki doesn't sound like a great idea if it means she falls into the hands of shinobi like that," said Choza Akamichi. "But I doubt anyone's going to just sit back and accept us having free Jinchuriki. Things were tense enough when Yugito-san defected to Konoha. Iwa and Kumo could potentially use this as a pretext to take action against us," Shibi Aburame said. directing everyone's attention towards the typically subdued shinobi council member. Given that we are still recovering from the recent invasion, we would find ourselves in dire straits. Especially since we would have very few allies, if any at all, Danzo said. Suna is in no position to aid us. Taki would likely side with Kumo and Iwa. Kiri would not take part due to their current circumstances, and the majority of the other villages would likely offer neither side any support. Kusa is the only village that might support us. He said this while keeping his focus on the village of Sarutobi. Even though Danzo remained silent, both men understood that he was criticizing them for depending too much on their allies, rather than fortifying the village and facing challenges head-on. Still, Sarutobi mentally dismissed the accusation without saying a word. That is why I will attempt to take the wind from Iwa and Kumo's sails before they can attempt any aggressive action against us, he stated. I will call for a summit meeting of the leaders of the various villages to be held within the next 2 months. There I will explain the dangers of this Akatsuki organization and hopefully blunt any aggressive intentions by showing that we lack any hostile intent. Before that, I believe it is prudent to finalize the decision to give Fu-san asylum. Are there any opposed to this motion at this time? The shinobi elders and clan heads exchanged silent looks for a while before Danzo finally said anything. I'm afraid that I must object, Hokage. Sama. While this Akatsuki organization seeking the Jinchuriki is a concern, I do not believe it warrants putting the village in danger just to protect one individual. Hiyashi backed the one-eyed shinobi elder, saying, I agree with Danzo. San's opposition to granting Fu-san asylum. It would not do the village any favors to take her in and antagonize the other villages. After that, a vote will be held, Sarutobi said, surveying his surroundings. All opposed? As predicted, Kaharu, Homura, Hiyashi, and Danzo all raised their good arms. Sarutobi looked at each of the others, but they all kept their hands down. Before anyone else raised their hand, he asked, and all for? Knowing the answer beforehand. Then the motion passes. Fu-san, you will be granted asylum within Konohagakure. You will be given protection and housing within these walls. While you will not be considered a Konoha shinobi, we would ask that you use your skills and abilities to defend this village should it come under attack, until such time as you choose to return to Takigakure no Sato, said he. Fu nodded quickly, having been biting her lip nervously the entire time. Oh. Of course Hokage. Sama. I'll be happy to do anything the village might need, she replied quickly. Sarutobi turned back to the others and nodded. Very well then. I will send the call for a summit meeting of the village leaders in Cage. There is, however, one more piece of news. This summit meeting will likely be my last major act as Hokage of Konoha. Everyone's attention was immediately drawn to this as Sarutobi went on. The recent invasion of this village by Suna and Otto, as well as other events, has made me realize that I am far too old to be the Hokage. I was already leaving my prime when I made Minato-san the Yondaime Hokage, and while I have done my best to continue watching over this village after his passing, I am simply too old to continue doing so. I will oversee the current situation to its conclusion, and upon either the success or failure of this summit meeting, I shall step down and allow my chosen successor to take the mantle of Godem Hokage, he stated before raising his hand. My chosen successor is Tsunade Senju. At this Tsunade stepped forward and caught everyone's attention. Danzo scowled right away, staring at Sarutobi without uttering a word. He didn't need to because Kaharu spoke on his behalf. Hokage. Sama, while Tsunade-san is indeed a strong kunoichi, she has been absent from the village for many years. Are there perhaps any better choices? Candidates who have been proven to be more stable and showing greater dedication to the village? She asked, trying to use caution when speaking. The older woman's remarks incensed Tsunade, but Sarutobi spoke before she could react. She is one of 4 possible choices, yes. However, I consider her to be the best choice out of all of them. Of my other choices, one is far too valuable in their current position to have them take up the position. One of them would very likely refuse the role outright, not considering themselves a good choice, and one of them certainly has the leadership skills and experience, but I question their capability to truly lead this village the way it was meant to be led, he continued, taking in the slightest movement of Danzo's brow. Evidently, Danzo recognized the subtle jab for what it was. I have spoken with Tsunade-san and I believe that she will embody the core ideals of the Hokage's position, and that she will prove to be a strong, capable Hokage. I will be there to help her acclimate to the position, until such time as my advice and help are no longer needed. Danzo showed no outward signs of his thoughts, but the rest of the council did not object, so he was left to stew in his own thoughts. He'd been passed over for the title of Hokage yet again. Again, the title ended up in the hands of someone who was too sentimental and frail to take the required action for the village's benefit. Danzo was aware that there wasn't much he could do because the current Hokage was responsible for choosing their successor. The Shinobi Council or the Daimyo could only select a Hokage if the previous one had died or become incapacitated before appointing a successor. In a situation like this, Danzo knew he could at last assume the role he felt was rightfully his. But he would have to wait for now. Observing no further worries or vocal dissatisfaction with his decision, Sarutobi nodded. He stood and said, "Very well then. This meeting is adjourned. Fu-san, let us finalize the details of your stay in Konoha." Fu nodded and started to leave the room with Tsunade, following Sarutobi. The final Senju was a little upset that Kaharu was doubting her legitimacy as Hokage, even though the elderly Kunoichi had valid criticisms of her. She refused to let it depress her, though. Rather, having come to terms with her destiny as the next Hokage, she extended her hand to grasp her renewed resolve. She would demonstrate that she was capable of following in the footsteps of her grandfather, granduncle, brother, and beloved in order to earn the title of Hokage. Sensing Tsunade's chosen successor and former pupil becoming more determined about something, Sarutobi grinned to himself. It gave him a feeling of pride and optimism for the village's future, confirming his decision to be wise. It was now just a matter of resolving the impending problems with Fu's asylum in Konoha. He had to pretend to be an outraged village leader and demand Fu's return in order to convince people that they weren't working together, even though he knew Shibuki wanted her to stay in Konoha. He believed that Taki posed no real threat unless Akatsuki made an attempt to compel Fu to return by attacking the village. The main worries were Iwa and Kumo, with Kumo being more so. He knew Kumo would take advantage of this opportunity to try to weaken or attack Konoha, even with the evidence of the recent kidnapping attempt on Hitomi and Hanabi Hyuga, as well as the blackmail Yugito had given him. And Iwa, under the notorious fence-sitter, Onoki as their leader, would follow if it meant bringing Konoha down a notch or two, especially in light of the previous Shinobi War and Minato's actions against them. At the very least, he hoped the summit would enable him to talk them out of starting another Shinobi War. If not the dissolution or destruction of the organization, at the very least he hoped it would force the villages to turn against the Akatsuki and ensure that they moved more cautiously. As they got closer to his office, he sighed in exhaustion. With lies, trickery, and subterfuge rampant in the shinobi world, politics was an extremely dangerous game. When he did eventually retire, he wanted to be free of such responsibilities. To be able to see Konohamaru for the first time and assist the young child in becoming a proud shinobi. As he considered that possible future and hoped that he could soon make it a reality, he grinned to himself.
That's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this great story. See you in the next one.